Hey everyone, Saipan Sailor here, and this is part 2 of Fire in the Yukon. Let's go. Now in this episode I'm going to tell you what I did when I went ashore in Honolulu while they were trying to tie up to the ship to the buoys and get the fuel barge out there. I got on the launch that afternoon with a bunch of guys. We got off the launch on the pier and then it ended up with myself and one of the ordinary seamen, some tall, skinny, blonde-headed kid from Seattle. So he and I got in the cab and we headed out to Waikiki Beach, and we walked into this club that was right on the beach. It was an open air type of club. You could see the sand right from inside. And there was music playing and quite a few people there. So we sat at the bar and ordered a couple of beers. And while the music was playing, all of a sudden this woman walked right up to him and practically threw herself on him, dragged him out to the dance floor. And they were dancing, and when the music stopped, I noticed they went and sat at what looked like two tables that were put together. There might have been a half a dozen people or more sitting around. And I thought, well, good for him, you know. A moment or so later, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed the people at that table were motioning to me, trying to get me to come over and sit with them. So I said, all right. I figured, why not? Walked over there, and the only chair that was available was right next to this other woman who was a blonde, not a bad looking gal. But she was drunk. I mean, hammered. Even though she was full control of her faculties, her cognitive abilities were at 100%. She knew what was going on around her, but she was sucking them down as fast as they were serving her. I mean, she was so drunk, I felt bad talking to her. But she told me that she was a naval intelligence officer, and she was in charge of a whole bank of computers, and that she hated her job. All right. I didn't care what she did. She could have told me she was a descendant from the tribal king Kamehameha or whatever. It didn't make any difference to me, you know. I was looking at her. So eventually I said, well, want to go for a walk on the beach? She said, yeah. So we walked out to the sand, sat in the lifeguard shack, and I started kissing her. And I'm looking around thinking, man, it's dark out here, nobody out here. And she must have read my mind, because she stopped me and she said, not here. She said, come on. We got in her car and drove out to her apartment. Now, on the way out there, I thought I was a crazy driver. I had my hands on the dashboard and my feet on the floorboard, getting ready for impact, because she was driving like a maniac. But again, I figured she took this route a million times, so I let her drive. We got there, got up to her apartment, and it was out by the Aloha Bowl. I remember that, and it was this big, like 4 or 5 different high-rise apartment buildings, a huge complex. But we got up to her apartment, we got inside, and I noticed that on her kitchen table, a little breakfast nook she had, draped over one of her chairs, was that white navy blouse with the shoulder bars and a whole bunch of ribbons. And when I seen that, I thought, oh yeah, she is somebody. So the next morning, we went out to a diner and had breakfast. And I knew she was done with me because she asked me if I wanted to be dropped off anywhere. And I said, yeah, take me down to Hotel Street. By then it was probably noonish, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I guess. Now, if you're familiar with Honolulu, and if you know where Hotel Street is, then I don't have to explain it to you. If you're not familiar with Honolulu, and you have no idea what I'm talking about, I'm still not going to explain it to you. But I hung out there the rest of the day and mingled with that party crowd. And boy, did they know how to party. So later that night, I don't know, it must have been 9:10ish, I decided to head back to the launch. I didn't have to be at work until 4 o'clock the next morning. Now, as I mentioned in a previous episode, we all got a day off, which were 2 watches. And they would send standbys from the Union Hall to stand our watch, which was a pretty cool gig if you're hanging around the Union Hall waiting for a ship. I used to do that a lot when I shipped out of the Wilmington Hall at Los Angeles. It's an easy $150, and it paid for a week at the hotel, wherever you were staying. So as I sat at the launch, some of the crew members started showing up. And then my buddy, who stood my watch, he showed up. And I asked him, I said, I guess the standby made it on board. He said, yeah. Now, that meant I didn't have to be to work until 4 o'clock the next morning. So I asked him, I said, you got any cash? He pulled out some cash, I pulled out some cash. We figured we had enough to go out and party some more, so we got into a cab and went back into town. And I made it back to the ship, stood my watch in the morning, and we sailed that day. What I need to talk about wasn't so much what I did when I went ashore. I was just blowing off some steam. But I need to explain to you, and it's going to take some explaining, what went on board the ship while I was ashore. See, while they were taking fuel, first of all, the fuel that we burned, and that was an old steamship, so they had a boiler which made steam. And the boiler, to generate the heat, it used fuel, which it burned. The type of fuel that we used was called bunker C. And if you're familiar with it, it's the nastiest, shittiest fuel you ever dealt with. That stuff gets on your clothes, it ain't coming out. It's stained for good. Well, back then, when they fueled the ship, the barge would pull up, or if you're at a pier, then a truck would pull up, and you would lower the crane down to the pier or the barge, and you would hook up their hose, which was about probably a 10-inch hose, 10-inch hose, I think. And they lift it up and they'd hook it up to our connections, and then when the engineers lined up the system, and decided which tank they were going to fill. Then they'd give them the high sign, and they turn on their pumps and they start filling the tank with fuel. Well, when they were finished fueling, okay, the hose still had that cookie oil in it. So they had to clean out the hose, and what they would do was they would flush it out with, I think, what's equivalent to jet fuel, really, really low viscosity fuel. But this time, what I heard is that they way overestimated the length of the hose and pumped a whole lot of jet fuel into the tanks. Now what that did is it turned that bunker C into something like diesel fuel, and that was not good. Wasn't good at all. That caused a whole lot of problems, especially when it got into the ship's fuel heating and filtration system, and then when it got to the burners. But I'm going to talk about that in my next episode, because it's going to take some explaining, like I said. That was one of the things that was going on. So we sailed with that fuel, and we were headed for Incheon, Korea, to the shipyard. And I'm going to stop right here because it's going to be a long episode next time to tell you what happened on the way there the following day. So until then, clear skies and calm seas.